Hello, everyone. My name is Charlotte Vorwald. I am a PhD candidate in biomedical engineering, and I am a 2019-2020 Professors for the Future Fellow. For my project this year, I'm focusing on a seminar series titled Beyond the Podium, Getting the Most Out of Academic Conferences. This is one of two seminars in the series where this one will focus on preparing for conferences before attendance. So, like many graduate students and academics alike, a lot of us understand that there is an expectation to attend academic conferences. While a lot of this expectation and advice that we've received along the way has to do or come from hearsay, essentially. There's really not a lot of resources to learn how to prepare for these venues and really what to expect before you attend. So I hope that this webinar sheds some light on how to best prepare for these. In particular, I'll focus on the learning objectives. Hopefully you'll be able to first compare and contrast presentation types to match your professional goals. Be able to discuss action plans for preparing for conferences, and also understand how to approach funding opportunities to support conference travel and attendance. So I'd like you to think to yourself and do a quick write of what do you think the purpose of attending an academic conference? So again, take a minute or so and pause this webinar to think about how you come to understand this. So academic conferences are one or multi-day events where researchers present and share their current work. Underlying that, you can develop your presentation skills through presenting and sharing your work. Through that, you can also understand your work in the context of your field or discipline. So by learning about others' work that they're sharing, you can get a better understanding. You can also learn new tools, techniques, and perspectives from these other people attending these, and ultimately connect with other researchers through the presentations or through natural conversations. Here I provided multiple components that come into preparing for a conference, and I'll be highlighting these along the way. First is deciding on the content and preference on your format to present and share your research. Second, focusing on submitting your abstract and/or paper along with your preference. Registering and securing travel and lodging. The logistics behind conferences is a big portion, so this is really important to keep in mind. And then also finally, preparing presentation materials. There are many different types of conference presentations, and it's helpful to understand the different types before choosing a preference. Again, I want to highlight that this is a preference for presentation types. You designate a preference, it's ultimately up to the conference organizers to select which one based on the volume and research that is submitted for that type of conference. So first, there are oral presentations. I'll go a little bit about the different styles that are offered. There's podium and panels. Second, there's poster presentations. I'll go in a little more detail of the different types of formats and some tips and tricks for best preparing for those. First, oral presentations. These are often standard podium presentations with some type of electronic projection to allow for PowerPoint or Keynote, for example. These are really helpful for capturing a larger targeted audience. They are often held in specific rooms for field or topic sessions, so very particular in the scope of the research that's presented in that session. And they're often hosted and organized by session chairs, and they're often highly represented in these topics. These types of presentations are also really helpful for practicing your public speaking to a larger audience. So that's something to keep in mind when considering this type of presentation. Now, poster presentations, these are a hybrid of the oral presentations, like I mentioned before, with publications. So there's a written and a verbal component to these types of presentations. So like I have shown in the image below, a standard poster session is you have a poster that you've created and printed, you display it on a poster board where you stand next to, and the attendees of that poster session, or the audience, if you will, can approach you, ask you certain questions, and initiate that discussion between you and that participant. These are very helpful for capturing a broad audience. So as you can see in this example below, it's a pretty large venue to allow people from all different research backgrounds to understand your research. And these are really helpful for fostering that one-on-one interaction. So like I mentioned, there's one or a few people at a time approaching you and asking questions about your research. And this is a very helpful opportunity to practice your elevator pitch. I do want to highlight with poster presentations the different roles that are involved. So while if you do choose a preference of being a presenter of a poster, it's also helpful to be the attendee either within later in that session or in another poster session. So the presenter is involved in clear and conveying the main message of your work and findings. And that's both through, again, the written and the verbal component. So making sure the format of the poster is really helpful, but also having a concise elevator pitch to foster that one-on-one interaction. The attendee, if you were in that role of attendee, making sure to approach presenters and ask insightful questions to really see how you can connect with that presenter. Like I mentioned before, the written component is really helpful for conveying your message well. And so the format of your poster will be very helpful for that. That's including the appropriate dimensions. Again, conference organizers should provide these details. So if you have any questions, they're a great resource for that. Making sure to include a clear title and text. The attendee should be able to read the text from about 10 feet away. I have an example in the bottom right corner provided by NYU of standard tips for designing effective presentations to the overall layout. These include qualities of well-designed posters, so making sure it's consistent, clean, easy to read, and there's a good use of graphics. If you have even more questions, don't hesitate to ask your cohort or advisor. It's not an abnormal question to ask peers for templates. I know I've done many poster sessions and I've asked colleagues for templates, and it's been extremely helpful for understanding what these tips and tricks are and just increase confidence when attending the conference. Another format has been proposed for poster presentations. Mike Morrison, a PhD candidate in Michigan State, recently proposed this new way to present research. So it follows the previous guidelines for efficient posters to an extreme with very limited text, data, and format as compared to traditional posters. It also includes a QR code to link to more details. So I have an example with Mike Morrison with his proposed poster example. I've also included a link to a YouTube video where he created that not only explains the benefits of this type of poster format, but specifically how it addresses the standard pitfalls of a poster session. So you get a little bit of a flavor of what a poster session can be like, and how this can help foster that, again, one-on-one conversation between the presenter and the attendee. I've also included here on this slide a link that he's provided on templates that are really helpful. Especially during this time, this unprecedented time of connecting digitally, I've included a brief list of ways to connect online in academic and conference settings. So while the number of conferences that are streamed digitally are limited, they can serve as helpful alternatives. There's electronic posters, so helping with waste. Some conferences do suggest displaying posters on electronic screens instead of poster boards. In the more virtual setting, there are Twitter posters. Some professional society, as you can see here on the bottom right, the Royal Chemistry Society, has initiated a Twitter conference where you can register online, which then you tweet your poster with the appropriate conference hashtags and any tags that delineate what subject or essentially session your poster is in. And that can be a great way, especially during this time, to limit travel, yet still increase exposure and awareness of your research. And then other conferences also welcome video presentations, so recording your presentation digitally and uploading it online. To bring this all together, I've summarized the key points to consider when deciding on the preference of your work for presenting at conferences. So first, thinking about the audience. Do you want to reach out to a broad audience in terms of research background, or are you looking more for a tailored audience within the subject of your research? So that's one thing to consider. Next is the level of interaction. Do you want to reach out to a larger group, or are you looking to connect on a one-on-one basis? And then third, what professional skills do you want to hone or increase? Is it your elevator pitch, being able to succinctly explain your research in a brief moment, or do you want to practice your presentation skills to a large audience? So that's another important point to consider. So again, I'd like you to think about this prompt for a minute or two and write down any thoughts that you have. What type of presentation would be most meaningful for your current work in staging graduate school or your level? So now that you've thought about the different presentation types that are out there and how you want to connect with those around you at a conference, the next portion is to think about the abstract and or paper submission. So the main goal of the submission is to provide the details of what you plan to present at the conference, as well as your preference of format. It's very imperative to watch out for the deadline. So keep a lookout for these announcements and emails. Some conferences also have started a social media account of some type. I know I've followed many on Twitter, and they'll post updates. The deadline sometimes is extended, so I keep a lookout for those, but I really try to focus on that first deadline that's advertised. And again, just like the poster, really following the format. It must follow the formatting requirements to be accepted. Again, that's provided by the conference. I would like to note that there is often a fee for submission, so keep an eye on that as well. So congratulations, your abstract and our paper has been accepted. Now what? I find it really helpful to create an action plan before attending the conference, so I feel best prepared. It alleviates a lot of stress before attending these. So here I've outlined some main steps, and I'll go into detail for each one a little bit more. So first, confirming the source of funding with your advisor, that's imperative. Second, marking networking events and sessions to attend beforehand. Have an idea of what you'd like to do on the day of the conference. If it's multi-day, what to do when is really helpful. Third, updating your social media presence. That's really helpful. That can help increase your exposure and understanding of what's going on during the conference. And lastly, listing potential people to connect with can really motivate you to network during the conference. So having an idea of who's going to be there can be really helpful. So first, securing the understanding of your funding situation before you're attending. So conference travel and attendance includes a lot of different components. So here I've listed the main ones that are most common across all different types of conferences. So first is registration. There's usually a pretty hefty fee for registering for these conferences, so keeping that in mind is very important. Second, materials. So one example is printing your poster. So if that is the type of presentation that you're selected for, making sure that you keep that in mind. Again, travel, lodging is a big part of attending a conference. And again, food, is that included? Thinking of how that'll be addressed. So in order to, it's really important to approach your advisor about the funding situation. So here I've outlined some steps that I find really helpful to ease the stress and approach your advisor. So first is to understand what you need. So like all the different components that I outlined previously, outlining the cost breakdown of the conference that you plan to present at is really important before meeting with your advisor. Really show that you've done your homework. Second, schedule a time to meet with your advisor one-on-one. And in this meeting, explain how this conference will add to your professional development and increase your group or collaborators' exposure. So not only showing your dedication to attending this conference, but how it's going to help you and your group and collaborator. And third, politely ask what level they are able to contribute. It's not an uncommon question to ask, and I find it helpful to realize that your advisor has been in your shoes before and understand that that's a very big part of attending a conference. They should be accommodating for that. However, make sure you've looked into other resources first. And here I've outlined some examples of resources provided by UC Davis and also external resources you can look at. For UC Davis in particular, I suggest looking at either department or graduate group awards, especially for conferences, at the time of conferences where many of the people in a cohort will go to one in particular. Sometimes there's some opportunities for funding for that conference. Another example, there are Graduate Student Association, GSA travel awards. There's one in the spring. The deadline is usually around January of the year awarded. There's also Graduate Studies travel awards at UC Davis. There's a fall and spring deadline. Keep in mind of those deadlines. There's also travel awards for postdocs as well, provided by UC Davis. So there's a deadline around January for the year awarded. And some external resources include conference organizations and donors. So again, it doesn't hurt to reach out to conference organizers to see what funding opportunities there are, as well as the donors of that conference. Usually on their website, they list those affiliations. And also professional societies that you may be a part of. That's a great resource as well. So another way to prepare for conferences is to mark events for increasing engagement before you attend. So many conferences include programs, either printed or online, where they designate who is presenting in what sessions. There's also many networking events that are often organized. So these include different luncheons that you can register for, and different and happy hours, for instance, more social events. Um, I find it helpful to also look into volunteer work. This can help with your funding situation, as I mentioned before, but this can also be a great way to network with peers and other attendees at conferences. So I find this as a great way to increase participation, but meeting new people. Updating your online and networking presence can really alleviate the stress while you're at a conference. So I've listed some here that are most notably used in academia. These include LinkedIn, so having your profile updated is really helpful. So when following up after you meet people at conferences, you can quickly connect on that. Twitter is used quite often. Again, like I mentioned, some conferences have Twitter accounts. And so being able to tweet the events that you find really interesting, or promoting your own presentation and work and experience, can be really helpful. So keeping that up to date is great. And here I've included others such as ResearchGate, Google Scholar, and also updating business cards. So having those on hand can be really helpful, having those ready to go before you leave. Again, another quick write for a couple minutes or so. Think about one networking goal that you might find helpful for an academic conference. So with this in mind, I hope you learned a lot about the different types of ways you can share your work, the different, um, a best way to approach your funding situation before attending a conference, and also ultimately learning how to connect with others and create your own action plan before attending a conference. I'd really like to thank the UC Davis Professors for the Future program that helped with this project, especially Dr. Teresa Dillinger and Dr. Ellen Hartigan O'Connor, for driving the Professors for the Future program. I'd also like to thank Dr. David Blancha with the technology behind the execution of this webinar. Thank you.